Why Europe's economy is dying. The 7 fatal wounds. Picture this. It's the mid-2030s. You're not watching Europe collapse in flames. There's no single crash moment, no dramatic sirens, no breaking news countdown. Instead, you land in Europe and everything looks preserved. The streets are tidy, the museums are packed, the trains still run, but the energy grid is owned by someone else. The ports are managed by someone else. The high-paying jobs are somewhere else. And the people who can still afford central Paris, central Milan, central Amsterdam, they're not building companies. They're managing assets. Europe doesn't fall off a cliff. It slowly becomes a continent that looks rich and feels expensive, but produces less and less. And here's the uncomfortable question. How did Europe go from economic peer of the United States to the world's nicest slow-motion problem? Europe's economic drift, what the data really reveals. Welcome back to Dr. Dan's channel. Today we're doing a full autopsy of Europe's economic drift, using the data, the structural incentives, and the policy trade-offs that rarely get said out loud. This is not Europe bad, America good. This is why the gap keeps widening, and why fixing it is harder than most leaders want to admit. We're going through 6 fatal wounds, not headlines, not vibes, mechanisms. Let's start with the scoreboard. The Great Divergence. How the EU and the US stopped moving together. After the 2008 financial crisis, Europe and America didn't just recover at different speeds. They started playing different games. The US leaned into deep capital markets, aggressive tech-scaling energy, abundance, faster crisis response tools. Europe leaned into fiscal caution, especially inside the euro area, tighter bank-driven finance, heavier regulation and slower scaling energy dependency, and later, energy shock. By the mid-2020s, this shows up as a structural gap in output and income, what many economists describe as a lost growth decade for Europe compared to the US, the Singju Post. And it matters because growth isn't just GDP charts. Growth is the tax base that funds healthcare, and pensions the fiscal capacity for defense, energy, industrial policy, the room to absorb shocks without breaking politics. When growth is thin, everything becomes a zero-sum fight, and that leads us straight into wound number 1. Wound 1. Deindustrialisation. For over half a century, the heartbeat of the European economy was the rhythmic hum of German industry. This wasn't just about factories. It was a finely tuned ecosystem, a model of prosperity built on the foundation of the post-war economic miracle. At its core was the legendary, a vast network of small and medium-sized, often family-owned enterprises. These firms were world leaders in niche, high-value manufacturing, forming the backbone of a powerful export-led economy. The formula was brutally effective, a simple 4-stroke engine of wealth creation. First, import cheap energy and raw materials, primarily from Russia. Second, process them through a world-class industrial base, leveraging unparalleled engineering skill. Third, export these high-value goods globally, especially to burgeoning markets like China. And fourth, recycle the enormous trade surpluses back into domestic stability and social welfare. But that engine has seized. The formula ran into a wall because it was built on geopolitical and economic assumptions that have evaporated. The era of cheap, predictable energy is over. Prices became punishingly high and dangerously volatile. For energy-intensive sectors like chemicals, glass, and metals, energy isn't just another cost line on a spreadsheet. It is the primary raw material, the very bloodstream of production. The consequences are now clearly visible in corporate balance sheets and strategic decisions. When a pillar of German industry like BASF commits over 10 billion euros to a new complex in China, while shuttering plants in its home base of Ludwigshafen, it's not a public relations move. It is a stark, mathematical calculation about where production remains viable. This is the critical point. Europe doesn't just lose a few large factories. It loses the entire ecosystem that grew around them. You lose the density of the supply chain, the specialized local logistics, and the intricate web of smaller suppliers who depend on the larger anchor firms. you lose the pipeline of skilled technical labor, as apprenticeships and vocational training programs shrink without clear career paths. And perhaps most insidiously, you lose the spillover innovation, the tacit knowledge and practical problem solving that only comes from the process of making real, physical things. A service-based economy can be powerful, absolutely, but it is not a substitute for industrial capacity. If you lose too much of your industrial base, you lose the latent ability to scale production of the very things you need most in a crisis: defense hardware, energy infrastructure, grid equipment, and advanced medical technology. You become a continent of consumers, not producers. This hollowing out of Europe's industrial core is the first wound, and its severity is compounded by the very factor that triggered it, which brings us to the second wound: energy. Wound 2. Energy costs and volatility. This is the physics problem nobody can regulate away. Energy is the master resource, the fundamental input for all economic activity. It's not just another commodity, it's what makes every other process possible. And because of that, energy is the most underrated driver of national competitiveness. The debate is often clouded by ideology, branding, and political speeches. But for a nation's industrial base, the question is brutally simple. Can you power your homes and factories at a predictable cost? Predictability is the key. It's the bedrock of long-term planning and investment. Without it, capital budgeting becomes a gamble, and risk-averse capital, the kind that builds factories, stays on the sidelines. European institutions themselves have documented the scale of the energy divergence with the United States. This isn't an external critique, it's an internal diagnosis. For industrial users, US electricity prices have been, in the words of one analysis, around 2 to 3 times lower than in the EU. This isn't a minor difference. For energy-intensive sectors like chemicals, metals, and paper production, a cost differential of this magnitude is the difference between profitability and closure. On natural gas, the story is one of volatility. Europe experienced the extreme price shocks of a region forced to rewire its entire supply chain in a matter of months. One EU analysis describes wholesale prices hitting extraordinary peaks, levels that don't just squeeze margins, but create existential industrial stress. Now it's important to add nuance. Europe has made real, impressive progress in diversifying its gas supply, rapidly building out LNG import capacity, and stabilizing its storage levels. The crisis response was a logistical feat, but stabilized doesn't mean globally competitive. It doesn't mean cheap, and critically, it doesn't mean predictable enough for heavy industry to commit to 20-year capital investments. The new, higher-cost energy reality has been absorbed, but it acts as a permanent drag on competitiveness. This is why energy becomes an economic sorting hat, separating industries based on their ability to absorb these higher costs. High-margin, specialized manufacturing or service industries that can pass through higher energy costs to their customers will survive, even thrive. But foundational, energy-intensive industries that compete on global markets and can't dictate prices, they relocate, they shrink, or they die. And once you lose that industrial ecosystem, the specialized suppliers, the skilled labor, the logistical networks, rebuilding it is not like reopening a restaurant after a bad year. It's more like trying to rebuild an aircraft carrier from scratch while you're already at sea in the middle of a storm. The capability once lost is incredibly difficult and expensive to recover. This structural energy disadvantage is a deep wound. Now add wound 3, which makes everything harder. Wound 3, demographics. Fewer workers, more retirees, and a shrinking margin for error. Europe's demographic challenge isn't just aging, it's a compound problem. Lower fertility, longer life expectancy, early retirements in some systems, high dependency ratios, political incentives skewed toward protecting current retirees. Italy is the extreme example people point to, because the numbers are stark. Italy's births have fallen to levels described as historically low, pressing the country deeper into a long-term worker shortage and fiscal pressure cycle. About Amazon. Here's why this becomes economic gravity. A lot of European welfare states are funded by current workers. So when the worker base shrinks, taxes climb or benefits get squeezed, services strain as demand rises, young talent feels priced into a system it doubts will deliver for them. Later emigration becomes rational. This is why demographic decline isn't just a social story, it's a balance sheet story. And once the population pyramid flips, every other reform becomes politically harder, because the median voter is older, more risk-averse, and more dependent on the existing system. Which brings us to wound number 4. Wound 4, the tech and scale gap. Europe has talent. What it struggles to build is giants. Europe produces world-class scientists, engineers, and researchers. The issue isn't brains, the issue is scale. The US has a massive unified market with one primary language for business, one dominant capital market gravity center, a venture ecosystem built to fund winner-take-most platforms, deep liquidity for growth firms. Europe has world-class pockets, then friction. Different. Languages, labor frameworks, tax regimes, compliance environments, national champions protected in ways that can slow disruption. Also, Europe is genuinely powerful at regulation, privacy, competition, platform rules. The problem is that regulation is easier than building globally dominant platforms, so Europe often ends up with strong consumer protections and imported tech stacks, meaning a lot of the high-margin digital value creation happens elsewhere, which then links directly to wound number 5. Wound 5. Capital flight and weaker equity culture. When money votes, it's been voting, not Europe. This part is boring until you realize it explains a lot of daily life. If domestic equity participation is lower and domestic growth investing is thinner, then fewer European startups scale, fewer European public markets become home for big listings. More savings get recycled into foreign growth markets. This becomes a feedback loop. Capital seeks higher growth. Higher growth attracts more capital funds, innovation and scale, which creates higher growth. And Europe's challenge is breaking that loop without pretending it's only about confidence or sentiment. Which leads to wound number 6, the one that changes the fiscal math of everything. Wound 6, the return of hard security costs. The peace dividend is ending, and it's colliding with the welfare state. For decades, Europe benefited from a post-Cold War environment where defense spending could be deprioritized. Now the environment is different, and Europe faces a brutal budgeting reality. You can fund pensions, healthcare, green transition, industrial subsidies, defense build-up, debt service, but not all of it at once, forever, with weak growth. This is why even mainstream European policy discussions have become more alarmed, which brings us to the warning label moment. Wound 7, the productivity trap, Europe's hidden slow leak. Up to now, we've talked about the loud stuff. The wounds that make headlines and dominate political debates. Factories shutting down, the heart of Germany's industrial machine going quiet, birth rates collapsing, leaving Italy's nurseries and schools echoing with silence, energy bills exploding, putting a strain on every household and business, and money fleeing the continent, seeking higher returns elsewhere. These are acute, painful crises. But there's one wound that's quieter. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It's a slow, almost imperceptible hiss. Think of it not as a sudden rupture, but as a slow leak in the engine of the entire European economy. It's arguably more lethal because it's the one you can't solve with a single policy announcement or an emergency bailout. This is Europe's productivity problem. And let's be absolutely clear. I don't mean Europeans don't work hard. That's a tired, inaccurate cliché. They do. In many sectors, the dedication, skill, and hours put in are immense. The issue isn't effort, it's output. I mean, Europe's economic machine isn't converting that work into growth, into value, the way the US does anymore. For every hour an employee works, the economy they work in is generating less wealth than its transatlantic counterpart. Here's the blunt reality. Europe's per capita income is roughly 30% lower than the United States. That's not a small rounding error. It's a generational gap in prosperity. And while factors like working hours play a part, a huge portion of that gap is explained by a productivity differential that has been widening for over 2 decades. Now watch what that means in practice. It's a story of two different operating systems for growth. In the US, when a company gets bigger, it scales fast and it scales vast. It operates within one legal system, from California to Maine. It markets and sells in one primary language. It navigates one set of core business rules and regulations. Crucially, it taps into the world's deepest capital market, a vast ocean of venture capital and public equity hungry for growth. This is all underpinned by a culture that, for better or worse, is built around risk, speed, and expansion. In Europe talks like a single market, but often behaves like 27 distinct markets taped together with bureaucratic friction. The dream of a frictionless continent of commerce remains just that, a dream. A company expanding from Lisbon to Warsaw has to navigate profoundly different labor rules, different tax systems that don't talk to each other, different national regulators with their own priorities, different consumer protection laws, different compliance regimes for everything from data privacy to product safety. Each border crossing introduces new legal friction, new administrative costs, new delays. So what happens in this environment? A brilliant startup in the EU can succeed, even dominate in its home market, and then hit a wall of complexity trying to expand across the continent. The company doesn't fail because the idea is bad, or the product is weak. It stalls because scaling becomes an administrative and legal obstacle course. The cost and time required to enter each new European market makes it prohibitively expensive. And while that's happening, something else is going on under the hood of the macroeconomy. Productivity growth in the euro area has been weak for years, and in the most recent data, it has actually fallen into negative territory, while the US has seen a resurgence. For example, recent OECD analysis notes that euro area labor productivity fell significantly in 2023 while the US saw robust growth, widening the gap at an accelerated pace. This isn't just a statistic, it's the sound of a future standard of living being eroded. And this matters profoundly because productivity growth is the invisible engine that pays for everything a modern European society wants to keep, and everything it now needs to build. It pays for the generous welfare state. It funds the pensions for an aging population. It sustains the high-quality public healthcare systems. It's what must finance the colossal cost of the green transition. It's what has to pay for the urgent rearmament in the face of new security threats. And it's what services the mountains of government debt accumulated over the years. If productivity, the size of the economic pie, is flat or shrinking, then a government trying to pay for all this only has two tools left in its box. A. Raise taxes on an already burdened population and corporate sector, risking capital flight and disincentivizing investment. Or B. Borrow more money, pushing debt to ever higher levels and betting that the future will somehow be able to pay the bill. And congratulations. That combination of higher taxes and more debt has basically been Europe's default economic strategy since the financial crisis of 2008. It's a strategy of preservation, not growth. Now here's the cruel twist in this slow-motion drama. Europe's leaders know this. They are acutely aware of the problem. That's precisely why the recent competitiveness agenda championed by figures like former ECB President Mario Draghi is being treated as such an urgent warning siren. His report isn't just another call for more spending. It's a fundamental diagnosis of the structural blockages that cause the productivity disease, the failure to scale innovation, the shallow and fragmented investment pools, the self-imposed energy constraints, and above all, the regulatory fragmentation that keeps Europe's economic whole smaller than the sum of its parts. So while wound number 1 is Germany's factories going dark, and wound number 3 is Italy's empty nurseries. Wound number 7 is the underlying condition that quietly makes all the others harder to fix. It's the economic gravity that pulls everything downward. Because if you don't fix the productivity engine, then even the solutions to the other wounds become progressively unaffordable. You can't subsidize your way out of an industrial decline forever if the economic base providing the subsidies is shrinking. You can't regulate your way into dynamic growth when your regulations, however well-intentioned, create barriers that prevent companies from achieving scale. And you cannot tax a stagnant economy into prosperity. Eventually, you run out of other people's money, and you run out of economic activity to tax. And that is the moment the slow leak stops being a temporary problem, the moment the economic malaise stops feeling like a cyclical recession and starts looking like a permanent trajectory. The Draghi warning. Slow and agonizing decline is not clickbait, it's a policy fear. Mario Draghi has been at the center of Europe's most existential economic moments. And reporting around his competitiveness work has used language that is unusually blunt, warning Europe risks a prolonged decline without major changes. In C. One widely reported figure tied to the scale of investment and reform ambition is on the order of hundreds of billions per year to close the gap, numbers that signal the size of the problem, not an easy budget tweak. In C. But here's the real catch. Europe's solution requires coordination. Coordination requires politics. Politics requires trust, and trust is under strain across the bloc. So what happens next? Two futures. The rebuild path versus the preserve path. Europe still has enormous strengths, world-class education in many countries, advanced manufacturing know-how, cultural and tourism dominance, sophisticated infrastructure, high quality of life in many regions, deep institutional history. So decline is not destiny, but the path depends on choices. Path A. Rebuild, cheaper, more reliable energy strategy, faster scaling conditions for firms, deeper capital markets integration, targeted industrial policy that actually scales production, realistic demographic strategy, family incentives, plus skilled immigration, plus productivity growth, defense industrial capacity that doesn't cannibalize everything else. Path B, preserve not collapse, preservation, a continent that stays beautiful, safe, expensive, and gradually less central to global production, innovation, and power. A place the world visits, not a place the world depends on. Outrow plus CTA. And that's the real story. Europe isn't about to explode, it's about to drift, unless the incentives change. If you want, in the next video we can do the other side of the coin. What the US did structurally that Europe didn't. Energy, capital markets, tech scale, and why America's advantages come with their own ticking risks. If you found this useful, hit like. It tells the algorithm you want more deep dives like this. Subscribe to Dr. Dan's channel for weekly breakdowns of economics, geopolitics, and the policies shaping your cost of living. And drop a comment. Which wound do you think is the most fatal? Energy, demographics, or the tech scale gap? See you in the next one.